What up, y'all? This is going to be a quick ICM review. I think all of these are. Played a bunch of MTTs and sit and goes today, but I think almost all of these are actually no. I was going to say I think these are all sit and goes, but no. There's at least one or two spots like this one that are from on demand on demand multi-table tournaments, which are basically like they're kind of like multi-table sit and goes essentially. Like they have a hyperstructure get done really fast, but can start with between 20 to like 50 players or so. So yeah, they're kind of like 4 to 5 table tournaments kind of that go pretty fast. All right, and we've got a bunch of ICM spots that we calculated today for our review session. So let's just get into it right away. All right, so we've got nines here. If you want to like go back and look at some of my early ICM videos, I talk about like the concept of what ICM is. And how to apply it a little bit. So I won't go over that again, although it'll come up as we're talking about the hands. Okay, so what do we got here? All right, so this is at a final table. I'm pretty sure we're in the money, 3, 6, 7. Yeah, so 7 left, 9 cash. So we're in the money right now. If you look at the stack distributions here, I've got, there's this very small stack with 5 big blinds. A lot of these middling stacks, have some ICM pressure. And then there's this one huge stack. So one very tiny, one huge, and then a bunch of middling stacks, all similar. So there's a decent amount of ICM pressure on us middling stacks to basically wait for this guy to bust, essentially, before we start doing things. So for that reason, like if he folds, we have to shove slightly tighter than normal. Or I do, especially because I've got the big stack to my left. These guys not as much. Like if it folds to them, like they can put pressure on all the other stacks that are very similar to them, so they can open up their shoving range. I have to tighten up though. This is what I'm thinking in game. And now let's see if that's right. Okay, I have to tighten up, and we have a spoiler here. Actually, I should not have showed you what he has. But not knowing that he has a callable hand, we have 16 big, or actually no less. We've got 13 big blinds. Like I said, all these stacks are very close to us. We have to tighten up here some, but not so tight that we would not shove a hand as strong as nines, I assume. But we'll see how close to being right I was. So I shove, get called, and we hold against ace jack. So that's the actual results. Now we go into the calculator and see if that was right. Okay, so this is the first hand. Yes, and so here we go. So I've already ran it. I also adjusted around the edges, but I mainly left it close to like what I was supposed to actually be doing. So this was very close to. Oh, sorry, you're not seeing it. Sorry, let me change the window real quick. All right, so this is very close to what I was supposed to be shoving. This range that you see here are the green hands. So basically 5s plus, pairs wise, ace deuce suited plus, ace 10 off plus, king jack off, and ace 10 off are very borderline. So from that spot where I just shoved nines, so like even a hand as strong as the ace 10 off, because of the ICM considerations, is like it's like barely plus EV and probably should be passed up because the edge is so thin. And we're not, we don't know that the people behind us are calling as tight as they're supposed to be. And same with king jack off, so we should probably be folding those. King queen off, also barely a plus EV shove. And then also hands like jack 10 suited, barely plus EV, king 9 suited, barely plus EV, like very thinly. And also some of these smaller pairs like sixes is like plus 0.02, fives plus 0.01, and a lot of these small suited aces plus 0.05. So a lot of these are very thin edges to shove. Obviously nines we're up to like plus 0.1, so it's a lot more of a clear shove as I thought. But actually I only tagged that hand because like nines I didn't question in game whether that was correct. I knew it was correct, but I was wondering what his calling range should be and like whether ace jack off should be in it, because I think it's pretty close, because I'm supposed to be shoving so tight. If you look at this range and like some of these and even some of these hands I might pass up on, like king 9 suited I probably would not shove there, and like ace 10 off I might, but it's very close. So I might be even tighter than I'm supposed to be, right? So then this is what he's supposed to call. So this is what I was curious about, whether he's supposed to call ace jack off. And if you can see, he calls this arrow here, and ace jack off, once we tweak my shoving range, so like the GTO shoving range, I was supposed to shove king 9 suited 100% of the time, I think. but I tweaked it because I think in real life I wouldn't, so I gave myself more like 25% of it. I think I was supposed to shove, yeah, I was supposed to shove fours like 80% of the time. I went down with that. I think I would not shove fours all the time in that spot, so I give it to myself 25%. So I made a little tweaks on what the the game theory optimal are, and then I saw what his is supposed to be given that I'm just barely. I didn't make any drastic changes. Like I left all the hands. I just ticked down the percentages of a few of them, and doing that, it shows ace jack off here is like literally plus 0.000. It's exactly break even call for him to like reshove with ace jack off, which is what he did in the hand. So like at best, it's a break even against my open shoving range if I'm really shoving all of those hands about those frequencies that we have inputted. So like he was barely correct to call me essentially, and it's plus 0.00. So it's neutral between him folding and calling my shove. Mainly because like I said, because of the ICM pressure, I have to shove so tight. And if you look over here at these shoving ranges, how I told you, I have to shove tight, right? 15% of hands. But then behind me, the big stack, obviously he can shove very wide, 60% of hands. But then, assuming he folds, look at all the medium stacks. Because they can put pressure on all the other medium stacks, they can shove 40% of hands if it folds to them, 43% of hands if it folds to them, and if it folds to a small blind, 90% of hands. So that just goes to illustrate that like the stack distributions is very critical, and knowing that like I'm like I'm like second in chips, although close with everyone else, and because I'm behind the big stack, I have to shove way tighter than like everyone else who has a similar stack size. Okay, so that's that first hand. And yeah, so like I said, I wasn't looking to see if my 9 shove was correct because I knew that it was. Okay, and then now let's go to playback of the next hand. Where is it? Blah, blah, blah. Give me 1 second. Okay, next hand. Okay, this hand is weird. Okay, so let's go back and go like this. Okay, so this is a 9-man sit and go. I don't often get in spots like this this early where I don't know what to do, but I honestly was a little bit perplexed here. So the Joker is a reg. He plays like high volume and like has pretty tight stats generally, and his raise first in is pretty tight. That doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. I only have 180 hands on him, but he's a reg, plays super high volume, and his stats are relatively tight. That's all very critical to what happens in this hand. So folds. He's in second position. There's no antes. It's first level, and he opens to 77, which is like 3.8x raise, very large raise. And we're sitting with ace queen off in this position. So what do? Once they go that big, it's pretty much reshove or fold on 25 big blinds like we are here. Once he goes like 3.8, there's no flatting against that big of size. It's too likely that like someone will you'll induce squeezes behind you from hands that you don't really want to induce from, like small pairs, for example, and stuff like that. So it's just pretty much either a reshove or fold spot. And like against a lot of players, I would just reshove because this is a reg and he has tight stats over a decent sample size. I decided it looked like a fold to me just because I thought his opening range was too strong. And so I folded. But I tagged it because I was not sure. So now let's see if that was correct. Okay, so now we go back over here. Okay, so GTO gave him, because it's a complex hand, basically not push or fold. It's someone raises and then you decide whether you should push or fold. Then basically I have to input the initial range that I put him on, and this looks like and this is the range I gave him. This looks like a very tight range, obviously here, but I think it's realistic given like his sizing and the fact that he's relatively tight and a reg. If he has if anything, this might be a little wide. I think he might be like with 7s and 6s. I have all of those in there, or like half of 6s, but like all the 7s, all the 8s, all the ace jack offs, half the ace 10 suited. I think he might like not be doing these sizes with those types of hands, but because I'm not sure about that, I wanted to start with like a slightly wider than what's possible. I think he might be even tighter than this, which is crazy, but like with that specific raise sizing anyways, because I think like with ace jack off and like 6s and 7s and stuff, I think he's a lot more likely to just go like min or like 2.2 or like 2.5 or something and not 3.8. But I'm not 100% sure about that, and obviously we didn't see his hand, so we don't really have any information to go off other than like our read on him. And so my read is like his range is like constructed something like this. when he goes like that, and might be even tighter. But I want it to be like on the conservative side in my assumptions. Okay, and so now the question is, what do we reshove given from our position, given that he's open to this amount, and we put him on this range of hands. Okay, and then we're next in position. So here's our range, what we're supposed to reshove. You can see it there. It looks kind of weird actually. Tens is like plus 0.02 barely, and jacks, because of the exact structure of his range, is not a reshove, which is insane. Ace 10 suited, actually, if you open it up, Ace 5 suited is 76% of the time, basically because you need a weak suited ace as like a bluff essentially to balance your range a little bit. So Ace 5 suited is in there 76% of the time, and Ace 4 suited 5% of the time. But if you look over here at Ace Queen off, which is what we actually had, it's in there 0% of the time. Never. Given if we're right about our read on his range when he goes almost 4x from early position, then, and he's fairly tight and is a reg. Obviously, also, like, I don't think it's really good to go that size if you're a reg, except if he's also a bad reg. He's a big losing player. But, like, most of the time, a bad reg is trying to exploit the weaker opponents behind him by just putting in a bigger size raise with a good hand, essentially. So, like, I'm pretty sure that's what was happening. And, like, a bad reg is rarely like, oh, I have 10-9 suited, I'm going to, like, put in the 4x. Very, very rarely, especially from early position. I just don't think that's happening. Or Jack 10 suited even, or Queen Jack off, or any of those hands. So I think my range, basically, the only question is my range reasonable? I think it very much is. And once we see that it is, it's just like we have to reshove extremely tight from that or from our position right next to him. And with the whole table behind us is another critical issue, right? Because if we do reshove, anyone can still wake up with the hand behind us as well. So if he had opened, obviously, like in the cutoff, and we're in the button or the small blind, and it's a 3.8x, it doesn't matter. I'm still ripping ace queen off happily, obviously. But from this position with no antes, I think that this was a reasonable fold, and it's borne out in here given the range that I put him on, that it is a fold. It's minus 0.21, so. Good fold us, I believe. Again, a lot of it depends on our read. Okay, next hand. Let's before we show that, let's go to the playback down here. Okay, and then let's look at it. Okay, next hand. Okay, this one's very weird. So, you might think, okay, so this is on the bubble of a 9 max. All right, so top 3 get paid, which is a critical. To ICM considerations, right? We're first in chips by a substantial amount. Second in chips is in the big blind, which is critical. Like the way that the stacks are lined up is very critical for what you're going to be doing. Because if it was, let's say the big stack was on the button and one of the short stacks was in the blind, that's a very different situation because basically, essentially, when the stack distribution is exactly like it is, we're first, and then 2 shorts, and then second, who has a decent amount. Basically, that calls for a very wide pushing range by the big stack, essentially, almost always. That's why I tagged this hand, because you're like, well, 7-5 off, like, why'd you even tag this hand? Because I knew it's close on the bubble to being an almost any 2 spot, or maybe it is an any 2 spot, any 2 cards. And so, basically, the reason this is so is because the guy in the big blind who has a lot of chips is going to have to call extremely tight because it's the stone bubble, and the other 2 stacks only have like half-ish chips. So even with relatively strong hands, he still has to fold a lot of them because he needs to outlast these shorter stacks, which he is pretty likely to do if he doesn't call off all of his chips, even if he knows I'm shoving a very wide range. So in this distribution, I'm supposed to shove extremely wide. I knew that even in game, and that's why I tagged the hand, because I'm like, is it so wide that I'm going 7-5 off? I think it probably is. But like I'm like in 9 max, I'm like when I've played sit and goes, I mostly play 6 max tournaments, and in those the bubble is different because in those two places pay out, and so when there's 3 left, you're on the bubble, and so like I'm very familiar with that distribution. I played less 9-man sit and goes and haven't reviewed as many spots, even though the concepts are still relevant, but still, like, spots like this I'm not as comfortable, so I didn't know in game. I knew it was wide and was almost an any 2 spot, but I wasn't sure. Okay, so in game I just folded, but I tagged the hand because I wasn't sure. And again, like if the distribution was different, the big stack was on the button, and say Moon Unit was in the big blind, it's not even close to being any two anymore because there's very little ICM pressure on Moon Unit because he's the shortest, and once the other two guys fold, they're who they have ICM pressure on them. Once they fold, he can just like call with a normal like not wide, but like a decent the amount of hands like he normally would essentially. So then my spot is no longer close to being any two for sure. Here though, it's very close to being any two because Moon Unit will like fold because he's just hoping someone behind him wakes up with the hand, so he has to call tight. The Danny has to call tight because he's is also like he has to worry about the guy behind him, and he's just hoping that he'll call and lose. So and then he has to call extremely tight because all these stacks are shorter. So because of that, I in game thought it was a very wide spot. Okay, so long explanation possibly, but to go through the concepts, it makes sense to talk about it this way, I think. All right, so I've already adjusted this a little bit. My hand, like what I would actually do. And made it like 95%. But basically, when I first ran the sim, the GTO solution is any two cards. So like it came up saying it's plus EV to shove any two cards. But then I started adjusting. But that's based on the calling range of the big blind being extremely tight. And if the big blind is a reg, who I know probably is as tight as he needs to be, in game this was also in my mind. I was like. The big blind was an unknown, and I assumed like a recreational who was like unfamiliar with these concepts, and so I thought his calling range might be wider than it should be. So basically we can look at this. So basically the green here, nines plus aces, that's what his calling range was supposed to be in the GTO solution. So if I shove any two cards, and even if he knows I'm shoving any two cards, he still can only call a range of any two cards. He still can only call nines plus nines through aces, no ace king suited. That was the GTO solution for this stack distribution. So I was correct, not in what I actually did because I didn't actually shove the 7-5 off, but I was correct in the GTO model. Assuming everyone behind me is calling correct, then I'm supposed to shove any two cards. But calling correct means that this guy never calls ace king suited or ace king. And is that realistic for a recreational? Not at all. Like they're gonna call ace king like almost every single time, I believe, even on the bubble, and even with the stack distributions the way they are. I don't really know. Like I can't see their cards when they fold, obviously, so I don't know. Maybe some recs really do that just because they're like they might not have studied ICM, but they obviously know, oh, if I go out here, I don't make money. I have a lot of chips compared to the other two guys. It's kind of intuitive, right, to a certain extent. So I don't know if actually they do, but in my mind, I'm like, there's no way that they do, right? And I've seen plenty of calls in those spots with hands like ace king and ace queen. So then the question is, okay, if we adjust his calling range to something more realistic, where he is calling ace king suited, ace queen suited, etc., is it still a shove for me with any two cards? And so I gave him a range, as you can see here. It's kind of like these boxed hands. I included ace queen suited, ace jack suited, ace queen off, ace king off. That's getting closer to reasonable, I think, for most players. I think I might have, yeah. And I also included eights and sevens even, just to see. Basically, I widened it up like substantially. He might be folding sevens and eights, but I put them in there just to see like what it does to my range. And if it makes 7-5 a fold, and it doesn't. So even if he's calling with that range, that includes hands like eights, sevens, ace, jack suited, ace queen off. Even if he's calling with that range, we're still supposed to shove 95% of hands, and 7-5 off is still in there. It's just like it changes it to. It takes out some of the very worst hands if he widens his calling range a little bit. So like our 7 deuce off becomes bad, our 8 deuce off becomes bad, our 6 deuce off becomes bad, and our 3 deuce off becomes bad. But not much else. Like almost everything else is still plus EV, at least by a little bit. So basically it is a very wide spot, but it's somewhat dependent on the big blind's calling range, just how loose he is or not, basically. And my read in the game was that he might be a little looser than he's supposed to be. But now looking at it, even if he is, 7-5 off is probably still a shove. It's still plus 0.1. It's not one of the super borderline hands here. But if if I have a read that he's even wider, he probably like just doesn't care about ICM at all. He like, let's just say he's not just a recreational, but also kind of like a maniac and bad. Well, then like very quickly as I add hands like king queen suited, king jack off, ace 10 suited, etc. in there, very quickly hands like 7-5 off eventually will become not a shove against if we have that read on the big blind. But given the read we actually had, I don't think it was enough to make that not a shove. I probably should have shoved that hand, and I didn't. So slight mistake probably, I would say. Obviously the edge is like narrow, but I think we should have taken it. Okay, couple more hands. All right, there's the 5-7 offhand. All right, and then, sorry, I should not have showed this. Options, show known hold cards. All right, you got a spoiler, but we'll see what actually happens here. So we are chip leading. This is another 9-man tournament again. We're in the big blind. Stacks are all very short, except for me and Moon Unit, who are close to each other. Top 3 make the money, right? So okay, so Nick Corsten shoves for 469. All right, and then I'm in the big blind. Should I call? It's closer than it looks. I mean, it's obviously a very, very bad, not very, very, but like a quite bad hand. But this guy should be going in pretty wide because he's like one of the shortest. We're not even on the bubble, and he rightly thinks that he probably still has a little bit, or a decent amount to fold equity here against the big blind and also against other players. So he should be quite wide here, which is why Queen 7 off in my mind becomes very close. I'm getting a price of 2-1 here. I need 33%, so I don't have to win, obviously, like even close to 50% of the time to call here. Just like it, taking out ICM considerations, I just have to win 33% of the time with a hand like Queen 7 off, and against a range that includes a lot of very weak or not weak, but like a lot of mediocre hands. Queen 7 off gets close to winning 33% of the time. So in game, I wasn't sure. Like I knew if he had like 380 or so, it's a call. But like 469, it's starting to get up where it's very close to being a fold. And I wasn't sure. I made the call in game, and we binked trip 7s and beat his Queen 10 off with a 6 suck out. So that was cool. But I still tagged it. So don't go by results, right? Just because you have good results doesn't mean you did the right thing. I still tagged it. Still going to review it because I wasn't sure if it was correct in game. And I was like, seems close. All right, so now let's go to the calculation and bink. All right, and this is what Nick Corsten is supposed to shove. Looks like this, okay? This is the GTO, what he's supposed to shove. So basically, the worst hands he's supposed to shove are King 7 suited, which is break even, and also, interestingly, Queen 10 off, which is exactly break even hand, and he had Queen 10 off. So that's interesting, right? Because if we look at it, he's supposed to shove actually, and if you look at, because you can look at the percentages, I opened a window, you guys can't see it, but it says he's supposed to shove 50% of 50% of the time that he has King 7 suited, and 50% of the time that he has Queen 10 off. So not even every Queen 10 off. Maybe he really does do that. Obviously, we have no idea because, I mean, the range that he's supposed to shove, he had a hand that's in that range, but it's right on the very border of being a hand that he's not supposed to shove, right? Like, if he goes one tick either direction, Jack 10 off, Queen 9 off, then he's shoving a hand he's not supposed to. And it's very possible with such a short stack and being the first in the pot that he decides to shove hands like all of his Queen 10 off, all of his Jack 10 off, all of his King 9 off, which he's also not supposed to shove here. Certainly all of his King 7 suited, I would say. I can't imagine him folding any of his King 7 suited, and even some of his like King 6 suited. But my point is, on the GTO solution in the big blind, I'm supposed to call Queen 7 suited, Queen 6 suited, but not Queen 7 off. Queen 7 off is not good enough. Queen 9 off is exactly borderline essentially. So Queen 8 off, Queen 7 off, I should fold in this spot. If he's shoving what we think that he was shoving, or what he's supposed to be shoving, right? So let's mess with his range a little bit. I think, so he actually showed up with Queen 10 off. I think he probably is not, mixing strategies like he's supposed to be, and like he doesn't know, sometimes I'm supposed to shove Queen 10 off here, sometimes I'm not. More likely, he had Queen 10 off. Every time he gets it in that spot, he's going to be shoving it. I'm going to put it in for 100%. He's supposed to shove Queen 10 off. King 7 suited is a bit stronger hand than Queen 10 off, and so obviously, technically it's like right in the same range, but in most people's minds it's a stronger hand, and it is, an actual better hand than queen 10 off. So I think we can also tick that up from 50% of the time he has it to 100% of the time he has it. I'm also going to put in, so we're giving him all of those. We're also giving him some jack 10 off. I'm going to say that 50% of the time, some king 6 suited 50% of the time, and some ace deuce off 50% of the time, which he's not supposed to have any ace deuce off, but I think it's realistic that he would. Okay, so that's just widening his range a very small amount, and in a way that I think is very realistic to what he might actually shove in game. And so let's see. He's also supposed to shove 100% of 10-9 suited and jack-9 suited. Maybe some people wouldn't do that. I think he would, though. I think everyone would, honestly. On that, almost everyone who has any clue at all would shove all of those hands when they are as short as he is and has first in impetus. All right, so I'm going to say give him those hands. So now that widens his range here. We've widened it here. And now we go to me and say best response and see like what it does to my range. I don't think it's going to be, because we're only widening it a little bit. I don't think it'll be enough to make queen 7 off a call, but I'm just like doing it just to see what it does to our calling range. Okay, and it makes queen 9 off goes from not being, or to being like exactly borderline to being a pure call. Queen 8 off gets kind of close, but queen 7 off is still not there. So even if he's a little wider than he should be, it's still a fold. I mean, obviously we can do it. Okay, but what if he's a lot wider? Give him all the jack 10 off, all the ace deuce off, which I think is reasonable. Most people are going to shove any ace on that stack size. All the king 6 suited, all the king 5 suited. Okay, now let's see what we call with. And like it goes up again, the percentage, but it goes up in places that don't include queen 7 off. So point is, even if you like make the most generous assumptions about how wide his range is, it's probably not going to get you to queen 7 off being a call there. So that was a slight mistake. I think if he has slightly less chips, like I said, like maybe 80 less chips, queen 7 off almost certainly is a call. But with his exact, like 4.5 big blinds or whatever he had, it's not. All right, one more hand, and then we'll call that good for the day. Okay, next one. Okay, this one's interesting, actually. Okay, so this is another 9-handed tournament. Oh, sorry. Let me get to the screen where you can see it. All right, another 9-man tournament, down to 5-handed. 3 make the money, so getting close to the bubble. So there's definitely ICM considerations, even though we're not right on the bubble. So, and if you look at the stack distributions, chip leader, small, and then like the 2 in the blinds, me and this guy, are both relatively large, but very close to each other, with this guy being ahead. He open shoves, so in his position, especially with the 2 second biggest stacks in the blinds, he should be shoving quite wide here, relatively, because like there is ICM pressure on us in the blinds. Not like total ICM pressure, because it's not the exact bubble, but still significant ICM pressure. And the question is, do we call? In game I did, and I thought it was pretty good. I didn't think too much about it. I thought, okay, this is pretty clear. The main thing I was thinking, I didn't take in, without ICM, it's an obvious call, but I wasn't thinking there was very much ICM at all, because we're still, the stacks are super shallow. Like these guys are not that close. Are not that short. They're pretty short, but they're not that short. So with 5 left, I just didn't think ICM was a big factor, but we'll see if I was correct. In-game, run out came like this, and we lost on the river to king 6 suited, which is gross. Because like if we won, we would have 2100 with everyone short, and it be in a freaking great spot to dominate the bubble and cash or probably win. But we lost. Okay, fine. And now let's review. See if my assumptions were correct. All right, so basically, let's see here. So the guy who shoved was Lam Davalorum or whatever, this guy right here. As you can see, he's supposed to shove 45% of hands, including all of the hands you see here, is what he's supposed to shove. Hands as weak as Jack 3 suited's in there, but barely. So let's say, Jack 5 suited is a little better. Hands like 10-7 suited, 10-6 suited. Hand 7-5 suited is in there, but barely. King 6 off is in there, but barely. King 7 off, King 8 off, they're all in there, but just barely. So those are ones, you can't be sure about a lot of those borderline ones, whether he'll shove them or not. And I had no particular read on him, except that he seemed like he sort of knew what he was doing relatively, but I didn't know for sure. no strong reads besides that. And so he shoves 45% of hands, and you're like, okay, well, intuitively, sevens performs very well against this very wide range of hands, right? And it does, obviously. And with the money in the pot, absent ICM considerations, it's a fist pump call against a range this wide, right? Because it's like, okay, sevens just is smashing this range. Like overall, like there's so many hands that, like, you know, Jack 7, Queen 7, Queen 5, where, you know, they're suited, of course, but still where you have them in pretty bad shape. You know, Ace 5 off, Ace 6 off, like all of this stuff, and you're only dominated by, you know, 8s plus. Very, very small amount of hands. And also some of those hands he might not just open rip, so we could take those out of his range, but we'll leave them in for now. Okay, so assuming he's shoving all of that, what are we supposed to call? And if you look here, this is our calling range in the small blind. Supposed to call 9s plus, ace queen suited plus, ace king off plus. So no ace queen off. No pocket sevens. Sevens is a big losing call if he's even if he's shoving a wide range, but that specific 45% of hands. Sevens is a big fold. Nines is like a fairly narrow call. So as you can see, sevens is a mistake to call here, even if he is shoving wide. And he had king 6 suited, which is kind of wide, right? Like, but that doesn't mean he's he might be shoving king 6 suited, but not, for example, jack 6 suited, which is in there as well. So then his shoving range might be even tighter than what it's supposed to be, game theoretically, and which would make sevens even more of a fold, right? So and so basically, it's very unlikely that his shoving range here, even though he knows he can shove wide, is probably not the case that he's shoving as wide as, you know, jack 7 off, 9-5 suited, 10-4 suited. If we thought that was the case, then it might get to the point where sevens are a call because he's shoving too wide, right? But I'm thinking more likely he's missing shoves with like jack 4 suited, jack 5 suited, jack 6 suited, missing shoves with maybe like 7-5 suited, queen deuce suited. He might be missing a bunch of those shoves, which are narrowly plus EV, and thus his range would be tighter than it should be. So making sevens even more of a fold is my point. So that's an interesting, a bunch of interesting hands. And obviously we could fiddle with the ranges, but if it's kind of like intuitively obvious that if anything, he would be tighter than, you know, than the range that he's supposed to be shoving, well, then you don't really even have to run it, because it's like it's just going to get even worse for sevens. And you could theoretically say, okay, well, what if we know that he's like shoving too wide? But it's really hard to know that unless you've got a specific, you know, a very specific read on players that, you know, they've been called in spots like that, and you've seen them show up with 10-5 suited and you've noted it or something, or seen them show up with 10-7 off and you've noted it. It's because at most of the time, I think he's going to show up with a hand that's in this range and not much like that's weaker outside of it, is my point, if anything. So I think if anything, he's too tight. All right, I've made that point a little too. I've dwelt on it a little too long, but you get the idea. Thanks for watching, bros. This was a interesting session with a lot of interesting hands to review. Go ahead and like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitch at The Illegit, twitch.tv/TheIllegit. And sometimes I Twitch, don't just make videos on here, Twitch stream, poker tournaments, and also like sometimes DTO review. I might do some DTO YouTube videos, which might be interesting. But anyways, check me out on there, and I'll catch all of y'all later. Peace.